20 medical degrees. Decades of combined experience. Millions of dollars in cash stacked on a mahogany desk. None of it could save Gabriel Falcone. The undisputed king of the city's underworld was rotting from the inside out, slowly killed by a phantom infection no antibiotic could touch. They called in the best surgeons in the world, and one by one, they packed their bags in defeat. It took a quiet girl who scrubbed the floors for minimum wage to see what they missed. Blood ruined everything. It seeped into the hand-woven Persian rugs, stained the crisp white scrubs of the private nurses, and turned the air inside the sprawling estate heavy with the scent of copper and bleach. Gabriel Falcone lay in the center of his converted library, a king drowning in his own bed sheets. He was 34, built like a heavyweight fighter, and practically untouchable on the streets. A rival syndicate had tried to change that 3 weeks ago with a drive-by shooting. They failed. A single bullet had passed clean through Gabriel's left shoulder, a flesh wound. It missed the artery, missed the bone. The emergency surgery was supposed to be a standard closure. An hour on the table, 2 weeks of rest, and he would be back to running his empire. Instead, Gabriel was dying. Dr. Harrison Cole paced the length of the room, running a hand over his sweating forehead. He was surgeon number 18. The 17 men and women before him had either quit in frustration or been politely escorted off the property by armed guards before they could fail any further. "His temperature is 104, Cole said, staring at the bank of monitors, blinking relentlessly in the dim light. "White blood cell count is plummeting. The necrosis is spreading radially from the incision site. Sepsis is already in the bloodstream. I'm telling you, Carmine, we have to amputate the arm at the shoulder. Tonight, or he's dead by tomorrow noon." Carmine did not blink. Gabriel's underboss stood in the corner, his tailored suit jacket discarded on a leather chair, the heavy shape of a pistol bulging at his waist. He looked at the Ivy League surgeon with dead, flat eyes. "You cut off his arm, Doc, and I cut off yours," Carmine said, his voice a low, gravelly scrape. "You were brought here to fix the infection. The first butcher closed the hole. You just have to make the meat heal." "Why won't it heal?" "Because medicine isn't magic," Cole snapped, his professional composure fracturing under the weight of the death threats. "We have him on every broad-spectrum antibiotic known to modern science: vancomycin, meropenem, zosyn. We've done 3 debridement procedures to scrape away the dead tissue. But the tissue keeps dying. It's like the infection is generating from thin air. I can't fight a ghost." In the far corner of the room, kneeling beside a silver tray of discarded biohazard bags, was Sadie. She wore a grey uniform, her hair tied back in a tight, practical knot. She was invisible. In a room full of mobsters and millionaire doctors, a 22-year-old maid holding a sponge was less than a piece of furniture. Sadie preferred it that way. Invisibility was safety. She had been working at the estate for 6 months, keeping her head down, wiping down baseboards, and ignoring the muffled screams that occasionally echoed from the basement. She needed the money to pay off her late mother's hospital debts. But for the past week, she had been assigned to the library, the trauma ward. Sadie quietly squeezed a rag into a plastic bucket. The water turned a pale, watery pink. She kept her eyes low, but she was always watching. She watched the doctors come and go, bringing in their shiny silver cases and their massive egos. She watched them look at iPads, blood cultures, and MRI scans. What she rarely saw them do was actually look at Gabriel. They treated him like a broken engine, staring at the diagnostic readouts instead of the machine itself. Sadie knew a lot about things breaking down. She grew up in a cramped apartment above a garment factory, raised by a woman who spent 40 years hunched over a sewing machine, fixing mistakes other people made. Sadie knew how things were put together. She knew seams, tension, and threads. She knew what happened when a foreign, incompatible material was forced into a delicate fabric. It puckered, it tore, it ruined the whole garment. Gabriel groaned. The sound was ragged, tearing through the quiet room. His chest heaved, slick with a sickly pale sweat. The heavy bandages wrapping his left shoulder were already weeping a foul-smelling, blackish-yellow fluid. Carmine stepped toward the bed, his tough exterior cracking just a fraction. He gripped the wooden bedpost. "Boss, hang in there. Cole is going to figure this out, or I'll find someone who will." "There is no one else," Cole muttered, pulling on a fresh pair of latex gloves. "I need to change the dressings again. But I am documenting my recommendation for immediate amputation. When he dies, this is not on me." "Everything in this room is on you," Carmine replied softly. Sadie grabbed a fresh roll of gauze and a sterile basin. It was her job to stand by the bed and hold the trash bag while the doctor discarded the rotting bandages. She approached the bed with silent, practiced steps. The smell hit her first. It was overpowering, the undeniable stench of decaying human flesh. But as she leaned in closer, holding the yellow biohazard bag open for Cole, she caught something else, a faint, sharp scent beneath the rot. It smelled like burnt almonds and cheap copper dye. Dr. Cole carefully peeled back the layers of heavy gauze from Gabriel's shoulder. The skin beneath was a horrifying landscape of mottled purple and black. The original entry wound had been sliced open during the repeated debridement procedures, leaving a jagged, gaping crater of muscle and fascia. Sadie held her breath, not because of the gore, but because of that smell. Burnt almonds. Copper. Her mother used to come home smelling exactly like that when the factory took cheap contracts from overseas. Garments sewn with uncertified, chemically treated industrial threads that made the workers' hands break out in blistering rashes. It was the smell of toxic, heavy metal dye. Cole sighed heavily, taking a pair of forceps and prodding the inflamed tissue. "Look at this," he said to Carmine, pointing at the deep muscle wall. "The surface tissue is entirely necrotic. The deep fascia stitches are holding the muscle together, but the tissue around them is just melting. It's acute necrotizing fasciitis. The bacteria is eating him alive." Sadie looked past the doctor's gloved hands. She stared into the wound. The doctor was right about one thing. The deep fascia stitches were holding the muscle together. But Sadie's eyes narrowed. The stitches weren't the thin, blue monofilament she had seen the nurses stock in the medical supply closet. They were thick. They were black. More importantly, they were braided. Standard internal medical sutures were almost always smooth to prevent bacteria from getting trapped in the microscopic grooves. These threads had a distinct, twisting weave. And they were weeping. The black color wasn't just the thread itself. It was a slow, viscous sludge, seeping out of the braided fibers, poisoning the pink muscle around it. The first surgeon hadn't just patched Gabriel up. He had planted a time bomb in his chest. "Bag," Cole snapped, holding up a bloody piece of gauze. Sadie didn't move the bag. She remained perfectly still, her eyes locked on the wound. The doctors had been treating a biological infection. They were pouring antibiotics into a man who wasn't sick with bacteria. He was being chemically poisoned, millimeter by millimeter, from the inside out. "Hey!" Cole barked, glancing at her. "Are you deaf? Give me the bag." Sadie looked up. She looked at Cole, then at the towering, terrifying bulk of Carmine. She knew the rules of her survival. Keep your mouth shut. Do your job. Don't look the men with guns in the eye. If she spoke up and was wrong, Carmine might just shoot her to relieve his own stress. But Gabriel let out another rattling, agonizing breath. He was drowning in his own dying body. "Those are the wrong stitches," Sadie said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the tense, quiet room, it sounded like a gunshot. Cole froze, forceps suspended in the air. He turned his head slowly, looking at her as if a stray dog had just spoken English. "Excuse me." Carmine's hand drifted instinctively toward his waist. "Who the hell are you? Shut your mouth and hold the garbage." Sadie swallowed hard, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She took half a step back, her grip tightening on the plastic basin. "I said, those are the wrong stitches in his muscle." Cole let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "Carmine, get this girl out of my operating space. Now." "Wait," Carmine said, his voice deadly quiet. He took a step toward Sadie. The intimidation rolling off him was suffocating. "What did you just say?" "The thread," Sadie forced the words out, her throat dry. She pointed a trembling bare finger toward Gabriel's open shoulder. "The doctor keeps saying he can't stop the infection. That's because it's not an infection. The thread holding his muscle together is braided industrial upholstery cord. It's not medical silk." Cole's face flushed a dark, angry red. "You ignorant little girl. It's standard, non-absorbable heavy suture for a massive trauma closure." "No, it isn't," Sadie interrupted, surprising even herself with the steel in her voice. "Medical thread is smooth. That thread is braided, and it's coated in something. You can smell it. It smells like bitter almond and heavy metal dye. The thread is hollow, or it was soaked in a chemical necrotoxin before the first doctor sewed it into him. Every time his heart beats, the friction squeezes more poison out of the braid into his bloodstream." Silence slammed into the room. Cole stared at the wound, then at Sadie. "That is the most absurd, ridiculous Hollywood garbage I have ever heard. Heavy metal toxins? Carmine, she is a maid. She scrubs toilets. I am a board-certified trauma surgeon." Carmine drew his gun. The heavy metal clicked as he pulled back the slide. He didn't point it at Sadie, but he didn't point it away from her either. He looked down at his boss. "Boss?" Carmine whispered. Gabriel's eyelids fluttered. The Mafia King slowly turned his head. His eyes were bloodshot, glassy with fever and pain, but beneath the haze, the brutal, calculating intelligence that had built an empire was still there. He looked at Cole. Then, slowly, he shifted his gaze to the terrified girl in the grey uniform. "Give her the scissors," Gabriel rasped. Cole looked horrified. "Mr. Falcone, you are delirious. If we cut the deep fascia stitches, the muscle wall will collapse." "I said," Gabriel breathed, his voice barely a rattle, "give her the damn scissors." Cole practically threw the sterile surgical scissors onto the metal tray. He backed away, raising his hands. "Fine. You want to let the cleaning staff perform surgery? His death is on your hands." Sadie didn't hesitate. She stepped up to the bed. Her hands, which had been shaking a moment ago, suddenly went completely still. She knew thread. She knew scissors. She took a pair of long silver tweezers from the tray and the sharp surgical snips. She leaned over the Mafia Boss. Up close, he was terrifying. A scar ran down his jawline, but right now he was just a broken seam waiting to be fixed. Sadie slid the tweezers into the wound, ignoring the blood, and clamped down on the thick black knot buried in the pink muscle. She pulled it taut. With a swift, clean motion, she snipped the thread. She pulled. A long, black, slick piece of cord slid out of the muscle. The moment it was removed, the thick, black sludge stopped pooling. Fresh, Bright red blood rushed into the puncture hole, flushing it clean. She moved to the next stitch. Snip. Pull. She pulled 6 poisoned stitches from Gabriel Falcone's chest. When she dropped the final, toxic black thread into the metal basin, it hit the stainless steel with a quiet clink. Silence stretched through the library, thick and suffocating. The only sound was the frantic, erratic beeping of the heart monitor attached to Gabriel's chest. Sadie backed away from the bed. The surgical scissors slipped from her fingers, clattering against the silver tray. Now that it was over, the adrenaline evaporated, leaving her hollow and trembling. She looked down at her hands. They were smeared with the mob boss's blood. She had just performed amateur surgery on the most dangerous man in the city, overriding a board-certified doctor while a hitman watched with a loaded gun. She was going to die. If the poison didn't kill Gabriel, Carmine would shoot her for mutilating him. "What did you just do?" Cole whispered, his voice pitching up in panic. He rushed to the bedside, shoving Sadie out of the way. "You left the muscle wall open. He's going to hemorrhage. Carmine, she just killed him. I need clamps. I need to close the fascia immediately." "Touch him," Carmine said, the gun leveling directly at the bridge of Cole's nose. "And I'll blow your brains all over these expensive books. Back away from the bed." Cole froze. He raised his bloody, gloved hands, retreating step by slow step. Carmine didn't look at the doctor. His eyes were locked on Gabriel. For 2 excruciating minutes, nothing happened. The open wound in Gabriel's shoulder wept bright, clean blood, pooling against the fresh gauze Sadie had shoved beneath him. But the black sludge was gone. The sickening, metallic smell of burnt almonds was already beginning to fade, replaced by the sterile bite of copper and iodine. Then, the monitor changed. The frantic, staccato rhythm of Gabriel's heart rate began to slow. The sharp spikes on the screen rounded out, settling into a steady, rhythmic hum. On the bed, Gabriel took a deep, shuddering breath. It was the first time in 4 days that his chest expanded fully without a wet, rattling gasp. The sickly yellow pallor of his skin seemed to recede, yielding to the pale, exhausted shade of a man who had just survived a war. His brow, previously slick with a boiling fever sweat, began to cool. He was stabilizing. Carmine let out a breath he sounded like he'd been holding for a week. He lowered the gun, though he didn't holster it. He turned his heavy gaze to Dr. Cole. "Pack your bags, Doc," Carmine said. His tone carried no anger, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying. "Leave the equipment, leave the medical records, walk out the front door and keep walking. If I ever see your face in this city again, I won't bother asking for a second opinion." Cole didn't argue. He stripped off his latex gloves, threw them on the floor, and bolted from the room without looking back. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind him, leaving a hollow finality in their wake. Carmine walked over to the metal basin. He looked down at the 6 black threads coiled in the bottom. They looked innocuous, like heavy sewing string. But the thick, dark liquid oozing from their braided fibers told a different story. He carefully sealed a plastic lid over the basin, locking the evidence away. Then, he turned to Sadie. She was pressed against the mahogany bookshelves, trying to melt into the shadows. Her grey uniform felt like a prison uniform. She kept her eyes on the floor, her breathing shallow. "Hey," Carmine said. Sadie flinched. "Look at me," he commanded softly. She forced her head up, meeting the enforcer's dead, flat eyes. But they weren't dead anymore. There was a flicker of something resembling respect. "What's your name?" Carmine asked. "Sadie," she managed to say, her throat tight. "Just Sadie." "Just Sadie," Carmine repeated. He glanced at the bed, where Gabriel was falling into the first, natural, healing sleep he'd had since the shooting. "Where did you learn about upholstery thread? You a seamstress?" "My mother was," Sadie said, keeping her answers short. She worked in a garment factory. They bought cheap, uncertified threads from overseas to cut costs. The dyes were full of heavy metals: lead, arsenic, cadmium. It soaked into the workers' skin. She came home smelling like bitter almonds every night. Her hands blistered so badly she lost her fingerprints. I know what chemical rot looks like. Carmine absorbed this quietly. He looked at her bare, unblistered hands. And the stitches? I fixed her mistakes, Sadie whispered. When her hands hurt too much to hold the needle, I did the piecework at night. I know how to pull a thread without tearing the fabric. Carmine nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick wad of $100 bills bound in a rubber band. He tossed it onto the small table next to Sadie. It hit the wood with a heavy thud. It was more money than she made in a year scrubbing floors. Go clean up, Carmine told her. Take the money. Go down to the kitchen and get something to eat. But don't leave the estate. You belong to the boss now. Sadie stared at the money. She didn't want it. She wanted to walk out the back door, get on a bus, and disappear into the anonymous grind of the city. Taking money from the Falcone family meant you owed them. It meant you were in the ledger. I just want to go home, Sadie said, her voice shaking but stubborn. Carmine smiled. It was a terrible, grim thing. You saved Gabriel Falcone's life. Whoever paid that first doctor to put poison in his chest is going to find out he survived. And when they do, they are going to look for the person who pulled the stitches. You walk out that door, you're dead by morning. This house is the only thing keeping you breathing. He turned back to Gabriel, dismissing her. Sadie looked at the cash, then at the sleeping king on the bed. She had cut the thread that was killing him. But looking at the heavy oak doors, she realized she had just tied herself to a much more dangerous string. 3 days later, the smell of bleach in the library was gone, replaced by the scent of black coffee and roasted garlic. Gabriel Falcone sat propped up against a mountain of down pillows. His left arm was strapped in a sleek black sling, the shoulder freshly bandaged with clean, white, unpoisoned gauze. He looked hollowed out, having lost 15 pounds to the fever, but the predatory sharpness had returned to his dark eyes. He was holding a glass of ice water in his right hand, listening as Carmine gave his report. Dr. Philip Croft, Carmine said, standing by the window. That was the first surgeon who closed you up, the one who put the braided threads in. Where is he? Gabriel's voice was a low rumble, still rough from days of screaming through the delirium. Gone. Cleared out his office, emptied his bank accounts, and caught a private charter out of Teterboro the night after the surgery. We're tracking the tail number. Looks like he bounced through the Caymans. He was paid heavily to make sure you died slowly. Made it look like a tragic post-operative infection. Clean. No bullets. No messy assassinations. Gabriel took a slow sip of water. Find him. I don't care what it costs. I want him alive. And I want the name of the man who wrote his check. Already on it, boss, Carmine said. Gabriel set the glass down on the bedside table. Bring the girl in. Carmine nodded and stepped out into the hallway. A moment later, Sadie walked through the double doors. She wasn't wearing her grey maid's uniform anymore. Carmine had ordered the housekeeper to burn it. Instead, she wore a simple pair of dark jeans and a black, long-sleeved sweater she had pulled from a stack of fresh clothes left in her new room. She had been moved from the basement staff quarters to a guest suite on the second floor. The mattress was softer than anything she had ever slept on, but she hadn't slept a wink. She stood at the foot of Gabriel's bed, keeping her distance. She folded her arms across her chest, a defensive barrier. Gabriel studied her. He had a way of looking at people that made them feel like they were being X-rayed. He took in her cheap sneakers, the defensive posture, the dark circles under her eyes, and the quiet, simmering defiance in the set of her jaw. "You're the seamstress," Gabriel said. It wasn't a question. "I'm a maid," Sadie corrected him quietly. "I was cleaning the baseboards in the hallway when they pulled me in to hold a trash bag." "You pulled poisoned thread out of my fascia while a man held a gun on you," Gabriel countered, his voice smooth and dangerous. "That makes you a little more than a maid." "It makes me someone who didn't want to watch a man rot to death if I could stop it," Sadie said. She met his gaze, refusing to look away, even though her pulse was hammering in her ears. "I don't care who you are. I know what heavy metal necrosis looks like. I just fixed the seam." Gabriel let out a short, raspy chuckle. It pulled at his shoulder, and he winced, his hand instinctively going to the bandages. "You fixed the seam," he repeated. The 18 highest-paid trauma surgeons on the East Coast stared at a gaping wound for 2 weeks and told me to amputate my arm. You looked at it for 5 minutes and found the bullet they missed. "They were looking at charts," Sadie said plainly. "They weren't looking at you. Rich people rely on machines to tell them what's broken. Poor people just look at the crack in the wall." Gabriel's eyes locked onto hers, holding her gaze with an intensity that made the air in the room feel heavy. For a man who lived in a world of complex lies, he found her blunt, unpolished honesty jarringly refreshing. "Carmine offered you money," Gabriel said. "You didn't take it." "Money from this house comes with strings," Sadie replied. "I don't like being tied up." "You're already tied up, Sadie," Gabriel said softly. "The people who paid Dr. Croft to kill me are going to find out that I'm sitting up, drinking ice water, and planning a war. They are going to ask questions. They will find out that a 22-year-old girl derailed a multi-million-dollar assassination. You are a loose end. And in my world, loose ends get burned." Sadie's stomach plummeted. The cynical armor she wore cracked just a fraction, revealing the terrified girl underneath. "I didn't ask for this. I just needed the hourly wage to pay off a hospital bill." Gabriel shifted in the bed, leaning forward slightly. "I know. Carmine ran your background, your mother's medical debt, the apartment above the factory. You have nothing. No family, no protection, no leverage. You are completely exposed." He paused, letting the cold reality settle over her. "But you have me," Gabriel said, the words ringing with absolute, terrifying authority. "You saved my life. In my family, a blood debt is absolute. You gave me back my life, so I am going to protect yours. You are no longer a maid in this house. You are a guest of the Falcone family. Anyone who wants to put a hand on you has to go through me first. And I promise you, Sadie, they will die trying." Sadie stood frozen. She didn't want to be a guest of the Mafia. She wanted her quiet, invisible life back. But looking at the scarred, ruthless king sitting in the bed, she realized that her old life was gone the moment she picked up those scissors. "What do I have to do?" she asked, her voice a fragile whisper. Gabriel leaned back against the pillows, his eyes never leaving hers. "Just survive," he said. "And help me find the bastard who sewed me up." Sweat dripped from Gabriel's chin, hitting the hardwood floor with soft, rhythmic slaps. He was out of bed, ignoring the protests of his private nurses. He stood in the center of the library, his right hand gripping a heavy iron kettlebell, his left arm still bound tightly in a black sling against his chest. His bare torso was a road map of violence. Bullet grazes, old knife wounds, and the jagged, puckered skin of his freshly healing shoulder painted a picture of a man who survived by refusing to stay down. Sadie stood in the doorway, holding a tray with a glass of ice water and a small plate of plain toast. She watched him work. Every time Gabriel hoisted the weight, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack bone. His breathing was ragged, harsh in the quiet room. He wasn't doing it to build muscle. He was doing it to prove to his own body who was in charge. "You're going to tear the internal tissue," Sadie said quietly. Gabriel stopped. He lowered the iron slowly to the floor, exhaling a long, steady breath. He grabbed a white towel from a nearby chair and wiped down his face, turning to look at her. "Muscle heals stronger when it tears. If I baby the shoulder, the scar tissue will knot up. I'll lose my range of motion." "There's a difference between stretching a scar and ripping a seam," Sadie replied. She walked into the room, setting the tray down on the desk. "You push too hard, you bleed out internally. And I don't have any more sterile scissors." Gabriel offered a faint, dry smile. It changed his face, making him look less like a syndicate boss and more like a tired, dangerous man. He walked over to the desk, picking up the ice water. "Fair point. I prefer you keeping your hands out of my chest cavity anyway." He drank the water down in one long pull, watching her over the rim of the glass. Sadie wore her borrowed clothes like armor, her posture stiff. She was a ghost haunting a billionaire's mansion, entirely out of her element, but stubbornly refusing to break. "You haven't been sleeping," Gabriel noted. "Your house is too quiet," Sadie said, crossing her arms. "I'm used to the sound of industrial sewing machines downstairs and sirens outside. Silence makes me think something is sneaking up on me. In this business, if it's quiet, something usually is." Gabriel leaned against the mahogany desk. "Carmine ran down your mother's hospital bills. The debt was bought by a collection agency a year ago. They've been garnishing your wages." Sadie stiffened, her eyes narrowing. "That's my business. You don't need to dig into my life." "I do when your life is tied to mine," Gabriel said smoothly. "The debt is gone. Paid in full this morning. You don't owe anyone a dime." Anger flashed across Sadie's face, hot and immediate. "I didn't ask you to do that. I told you, I don't take money with strings." "It's not a string. It's a severing," Gabriel countered, his voice dropping a register, hardening into the tone that ran an empire. "You saved my life. I clear your ledger. That is how a transaction works. I don't like owing people, Sadie, especially people who aren't in the game. Now we are even." Before Sadie could fire back, the heavy oak doors swung open. Carmine strode in, holding a manila folder. The enforcer took one look at the tension between them and wisely ignored it, stepping straight to Gabriel. "The lab results came back on the thread we pulled out of you," Carmine said, tossing the folder onto the desk. Gabriel's demeanor shifted instantly. The bruised, recovering man vanished, replaced by a predator scenting blood. He flipped the folder open. "Read it to me." It's a braided synthetic polymer, heavy on the nylon. The dark sludge leaking from it was a custom chemical cocktail, Carmine explained, pointing at a block of technical text. High concentrations of cadmium combined with a synthetic necrotizing agent. A flesh-eating toxin. The friction of your muscle moving literally squeezed the poison out of the braid. A slow drip. Whoever engineered this knew exactly what they were doing. Gabriel stared at the paper. "Can we trace the thread?" "That's the problem," Carmine grunted. "The lab says it's industrial, upholstery or heavy canvas, but there's a million suppliers in the city. We could spend a year checking textile warehouses." Sadie moved closer. She looked at the macro photograph of the thread clipped to the report. The weave was magnified, showing the intricate twisting pattern. She leaned over the desk, her eyes scanning the black and white image. "It's not upholstery," Sadie said flatly. Both men turned to look at her. Sadie pointed a small, steady finger at the photograph. "Upholstery thread is typically a 4-ply twist to handle furniture tension. This is a 12-ply diamond braid. See the crisscross pattern in the fiber? That's designed for extreme weather resistance and heavy load bearing. Gabriel watched her face, fascinated by the sudden shift in her demeanor. When she talked about textiles, the fear vanished. She was an expert in her own element. "So what is it used for?" he asked. "Awnings, heavy-duty tarps, and maritime sails," Sadie answered. She picked up the photo, examining it closer. "But look at the dye. The report says it's heavily concentrated with cadmium. Modern American textile mills banned heavy cadmium dyes years ago. This is cheap import stuff, smuggled, and there's only one place in the city that deals in uncertified, heavy-ply maritime thread." Carmine narrowed his eyes. "Where?" "The old dockyards," Sadie said, dropping the photo back onto the desk. "Pier 42. There's a wholesale supplier there, Miller and Sons. They sell black market textiles to sweatshops that make counterfeit boat covers and industrial tents. If someone wanted untraceable toxic industrial thread to soak in poison, they bought it from Miller." Gabriel closed the folder. A cold, absolute stillness settled over him. It was a terrifying thing to witness. "Carmine," Gabriel said softly, "get the cars ready. We're taking a ride to the docks." Rain turned the cobblestones of the warehouse district into a slick, oily mirror. The air smelled of diesel exhaust, rotting fish, and salt spray. Gabriel's black SUV idled in the shadows of a towering, rusted crane. 2 more sedans sat behind it, engines purring quietly. Inside the lead car, Gabriel adjusted his suit jacket over his black sling. He was pale, his shoulder burning a low, steady ache, but his eyes were sharp. Sadie sat in the back seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She felt sick. When she named the supplier, she hadn't expected Gabriel to bring her along, but Gabriel insisted she was the only one who could identify the specific spool and the ledger entries among the thousands of chaotic records Miller likely kept. "Stay close to Carmine," Gabriel ordered without looking back at her. "If something goes wrong, you don't run. You drop to the floor and you wait. Understand?" Sadie nodded once. "I know how to make myself small." "Good." Gabriel opened the door, stepping out into the cold rain. Carmine and 4 other men in dark coats flanked them as they approached the rolling steel doors of Miller and Sons Wholesale. It was nearly midnight, but a dim yellow light bled through the frosted glass windows of the office above the warehouse floor. Illegal sweatshops didn't keep banking hours. Carmine didn't bother knocking. He kicked the side door right next to the deadbolt. The heavy boot shattered the wooden frame, and the door slammed inward with a deafening crack. They moved inside like a strike team. The warehouse was massive, filled with towering racks of fabric bolts, industrial spools the size of car tires, and the overwhelming smell of machine grease and chemical dyes. Sadie followed closely behind Carmine. Her heart pounded against her ribs. The smell brought her right back to her childhood. The bitter tang of toxic colorants hung heavy in the air. "Who the hell is that?" a voice barked from the metal catwalk above. A heavy-set man in a stained dress shirt appeared at the railing, holding a shotgun. He didn't even get a chance to rack the slide. 3 of Gabriel's men drew their weapons instantly, the red dots of their laser sights painting the man's chest. "Put it down, Miller," Gabriel said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried effortlessly through the cavernous space. "Or you're dead before it hits the floor." Miller froze. He squinted through the dim light, his face draining of color as he recognized the man standing in the center of his warehouse. Slowly, carefully, he laid the shotgun on the metal grating. He raised his hands and trudged down the iron stairs. "Mr. Falcone," Miller stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead. I didn't know it was you. We pay our tax to your captains on time, every month." I'm not here for your money, Gabriel said, stepping closer. The intimidation rolling off him was physical. I'm here for your ledger. Ledger? Miller swallowed hard. I don't know what you mean. We sell fabric, Gabriel gestured to Sadie. She stepped forward, her legs feeling like lead, but she forced herself to meet Miller's panicked eyes. 12-ply diamond braid nylon, Sadie said, her voice echoing slightly in the large room. Dyed black. Heavy cadmium concentration. You sold a small spool of it about a month ago. Someone needed it, and they needed it off the books. Miller looked at Sadie, confused by the young girl in the middle of a mafia hit squad. I sell thousands of miles of thread. I don't remember every spool. Carmine drew his pistol, pressing the cold steel barrel directly under Miller's jaw. Remember harder. Okay, Miller choked out, his eyes wide. The back office, the blue binders, cash sales. It's in there. Gabriel nodded. Show her. Carmine marched Miller to a cluttered desk in the corner of the warehouse floor. The desk was piled high with invoices and fabric samples. Miller pointed a shaking finger at a stack of worn blue binders. Sadie stepped up to the desk. She ignored the men with guns. She focused on the paper. She opened the binder for the previous month, running her finger down the messy, handwritten columns of sales. Yards of canvas, gross tons of zippers. Then she found it. Here, Sadie said. She tapped the page. 4 weeks ago, 1 spool, 12-ply maritime black nylon, sold for cash. $5,000. Gabriel stepped up behind her, looking over her shoulder. $5,000 for a spool of string. It's hush money, Sadie said quietly. Nobody pays that much for thread unless they are paying for the supplier's silence. Gabriel looked at Miller. The warehouse owner was trembling violently now. Who bought it, Miller? A doctor, Miller whispered, his voice cracking. A fancy guy in a suit. Said he needed it for a private project. Paid cash. Dr. Croft, Carmine muttered. Gabriel leaned over the desk, invading Miller's space. And who introduced Dr. Croft to you? A high society surgeon doesn't just wander into a black market dockyard looking for untraceable thread. Someone pointed him to you. Give me the name. Miller squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head. If I say his name, he'll kill my whole family. If you don't say his name, Gabriel replied softly, I will burn this warehouse to the ground with you inside it. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the desk. Only the sound of the rain hammering on the tin roof filled the void. Miller opened his eyes. They were filled with absolute despair. It was Leo, Miller gasped out. Leo Rossi. He brought the doctor here. Carmine cursed under his breath, lowering his gun. Gabriel didn't move. His face turned to stone. The air around him seemed to freeze. Leo Rossi wasn't just a rival. He wasn't a street thug. He was Gabriel's oldest captain, the man who had trained him, the man who had just tried to rot him from the inside out. Rain washed the blood and grease off the SUV's tires as they sped back to the estate. But the heavy, suffocating silence inside the cabin couldn't be scrubbed away. Gabriel stared out the window into the dark, slick streets. He didn't move. He barely blinked. Leo Rossi. Carmine gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were bone white. Boss, you give the word, and I'll take a crew to his house right now. We pull him out of bed and put a bullet in his knees before he can make a phone call. No, Gabriel said. The word was hollow, devoid of its usual booming authority. He bought the poison. Gabriel, Carmine argued, his voice thick with betrayal. Carmine rarely used his boss's first name. He paid Croft to sew it into you. He's been sitting by your bed for 2 weeks, holding your hand, telling you to stay strong while he watched you rot. I know what he did, Gabriel snapped, the sudden venom in his voice silencing the car. He closed his eyes, leaning his head against the cold glass. Leo controls the docks, the unions, and half the judges in the county. If we shoot him in the middle of the night without a trial in front of the other captains, the family splits. It starts a civil war. We don't just execute him, Carmine. We dismantle him. We make him confess in front of everyone. In the back seat, Sadie kept her eyes pinned to her lap. She felt entirely out of place, a civilian trapped in a war room. But she couldn't help noticing the dark, wet stain spreading across the shoulder of Gabriel's tailored suit jacket. The exertion at the warehouse had cost him. By the time they reached the estate, Gabriel was pale and sweating again. He bypassed the medical staff waiting in the foyer and walked straight into the library, shutting the heavy oak doors behind him, Carmine and Sadie. He stripped off the ruined jacket, dropping it to the floor. The white dress shirt beneath was soaked with fresh, bright red blood. Carmine cursed. "I'll get the nurse." "Leave the nurses out of it," Gabriel gritted out, bracing his good hand heavily against the desk. "They work for whoever pays them. Right now, I don't trust anyone on the payroll. Just get the first aid kit." Carmine retrieved a heavy white plastic box from the cabinet and set it on the desk. But his massive, calloused hands hesitated over the sterile gauze. He was a man built to break bones, not mend them. Sadie didn't wait for permission. She stepped up to the desk, opened the kit, and pulled out a fresh pair of trauma shears. "Sit down," she told Gabriel. Her voice lacked the trembling fear it held yesterday. The warehouse had changed something. She had seen the monsters in the dark and realized they bled just like anyone else. Gabriel looked at her, his jaw locked in pain, then slowly lowered himself into the leather desk chair. Sadie cut away the ruined shirt and carefully peeled back the soaked bandages. The wound was bleeding freely, but the blood was clean. No black sludge. No smell of almonds. "You ripped the new stitches," she murmured, grabbing a stack of gauze pads and pressing them firmly against his shoulder. Gabriel hissed, his muscles jumping under her hands. "It's fine, just pack it tight." "It's not fine. You pushed a healing seam too hard," Sadie said, keeping steady pressure on the wound. She looked down at his face. The ruthless Mafia king was gone, replaced by a deeply exhausted man staring at the floor. "Leo was your friend." "Leo taught me how to shoot," Gabriel said softly, the confession slipping out in the quiet room. "He took me in when I was 15, after my father got hit. He showed me how to dress, how to talk to politicians. He told me I was the son he never had." "People lie," Sadie said simply. Gabriel looked up at her, studying the calm, focused lines of her face. "Does it ever bother you? How easy it is for people to tear each other apart. I grew up watching factory owners dock a week's pay from women who couldn't afford groceries because they broke a needle," Sadie replied, securing a strip of medical tape over the fresh gauze. "Greed doesn't surprise me. The people closest to the machines are always the ones who get caught in the gears. Leo wanted your seat. He just didn't want to get his own hands dirty taking it." She stepped back, dropping the bloody shears into a biohazard bin. "You're sealed. But if you keep flexing that muscle, the tape won't hold." Gabriel reached up, gently touching the fresh, tight bandage. He looked at Sadie, a deep, silent current of gratitude passing between them. She wasn't just fixing his physical wounds. Her blunt, unvarnished pragmatism was keeping him grounded when his entire world was tilting on its axis. "Carmine," Gabriel said, his voice hardening back into the cold iron of a boss. "Yeah, boss. Call the captains, all 5 of them. Tell them I've had a breakthrough in my recovery. Tell them I'm hosting a private dinner here tomorrow night to discuss the future of the family." Carmine smiled grimly. "And Leo?" "Make sure Leo gets a personal invitation," Gabriel said, standing up. "Tell him I want him sitting right next to me." Crystal glasses gleamed under the warm, amber light of the dining room chandelier. The table was set for 7, draped in heavy white linen and adorned with silver cutlery that had been in the Falcone family for 3 generations. Sadie stood in the corner shadows, near the heavy velvet drapes. Gabriel had offered to let her stay upstairs, safe and out of sight. She had refused. She had pulled the poison from his chest. She wanted to see the face of the man who put it there. She wore a simple black dress, blending into the background, invisible once again. The captains arrived in a wave of expensive cologne, tailored wool, and guarded whispers. They were hard, dangerous men, veterans of a dozen street wars, but they all quieted respectfully when they entered the dining room. Gabriel sat at the head of the table. He wore a dark charcoal suit, his left arm resting casually in his lap, the sling hidden beneath the table. He had spent an hour with the makeup artist from the family's legitimate funeral parlor, ensuring his skin looked paler, sicker, and more exhausted than he actually was. He looked like a man clinging to his last days. Leo Rossi was the last to arrive. He was 60, with thick silver hair swept back from a handsome, weathered face. He wore a cashmere coat and carried an air of grandfatherly warmth that instantly filled the room. He walked straight to the head of the table, placing a heavy, affectionate hand on Gabriel's uninjured right shoulder. "Gabriel," Leo murmured, his voice thick with manufactured grief. "Look at you. You shouldn't be out of bed. The doctors said you need rest." "The doctors are gone, Leo," Gabriel said, offering a weak, trembling smile. "I sent them away. I wanted to be with my family tonight." Leo's eyes flickered, just a fraction of a second of surprise, before settling back into deep concern. "Of course, son. We're here for you." He took the seat to Gabriel's right. The other captains filtered into their chairs. Carmine stood by the doors, his arms crossed, his eyes locked on Leo's spine. Dinner was served in a tense, stifling silence. Platters of roasted lamb, garlic potatoes, and heavy red wine circulated. Gabriel barely touched his plate. He picked up his wine glass with a shaking hand, playing the part of a dying king perfectly. Sadie watched from the wall. She studied Leo. The older man was eating heartily, chatting in low, respectful tones with the captain across from him. He looked entirely relaxed. He looked like a man who knew he was a week away from taking the throne. "I brought you all here," Gabriel finally spoke, his voice raspy, cutting through the clatter of silverware. "Because we need to talk about transitions." The table went dead silent. The captain stopped chewing. "My health is failing," Gabriel lied smoothly, looking down at his plate. "The infection in my shoulder isn't responding to the antibiotics. The doctors told me I might not make it to the end of the month." A murmur of genuine shock rippled through the table. Leo leaned in, his face a mask of sorrow. "Don't talk like that, Gabriel. We'll fly in specialists from Europe. We'll find a way." "There is no other way, Leo," Gabriel said softly. "But before I step down, I need to tie up a few loose ends. Specifically, the drive-by shooting that put me in this chair." Leo took a slow sip of his wine. "We're tearing the city apart, looking for the crew that did it. We'll bring you their heads." "Don't bother," Gabriel said. He reached into his suit jacket with his right hand. "The bullets didn't kill me. It was the medicine." He tossed something onto the center of the pristine white tablecloth. It landed with a soft, quiet thud. A small, clear plastic evidence bag. Inside, resting against the plastic, were 6 pieces of thick, black, braided thread, stained with dried blood and chemical sludge. The captain stared at the bag in confusion. Leo Rossi stared at it, and for the first time all night, he stopped breathing. Dr. Philip Croft was paid $5 million to sew my muscle together with industrial maritime nylon, Gabriel said, his voice dropping the weak, raspy act. The words rang out sharp, cold, and absolute. The thread was soaked in a heavy metal necrotoxin. Every time I breathed, the stitch squeezed poison directly into my bloodstream. It was a brilliant, untraceable assassination. The tension in the room spiked violently. Hands drifted beneath the table toward hidden holsters. "Gabriel, what is this?" one of the captains demanded. "Croft did this?" "Croft was the needle," Gabriel said, never taking his eyes off Leo. But someone else held the thread. Someone who bought the nylon from a black market dockyard supplier named Miller. Someone who paid cash to make sure the boss died quietly in his bed, leaving the seat open for an elder statesman to take over. Leo's face was frozen. The grandfatherly warmth had vanished, leaving only a cold, calculating void. He looked at the black thread on the white tablecloth. "Miller is a rat," Leo said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You're going to take the word of a dockyard thief over your own family." "I didn't say Miller gave me your name, Leo," Gabriel replied smoothly, leaning back in his chair. "You just gave it to yourself." The trap snapped shut. The other captains turned to Leo, the realization dawning on their faces. Gabriel hadn't accused Leo. Leo had just defended himself against an accusation that hadn't been spoken. Leo realized his mistake. His jaw tightened. He looked at Gabriel, the facade completely shattering. "You always were too smart for your own good, kid," Leo whispered. He pushed his chair back, his hand sliding slowly toward the inside of his cashmere coat. From the corner of the room, Sadie's voice cut through the silence like a scalpel. "He's reaching for his left pocket." Carmine didn't hesitate. Before Leo's hand could clear the cashmere fabric of his coat, the enforcer drew his weapon and fired a single deafening shot. The sound cracked through the dining room, blowing out a pane of the bay window and shattering a crystal wine glass on the table. Leo screamed. He slammed backward into his heavy oak chair, his left arm dropping limply to his side. A silver snub-nosed revolver clattered to the hardwood floor, spinning to a stop near Gabriel's polished leather shoes. Instantly, the other 5 captains were on their feet. Chairs overturned, crashing onto the rugs as 5 guns were drawn and leveled at Leo. The elder statesman was gasping, clutching his shattered shoulder as dark blood quickly ruined the fine wool of his suit. He looked small now. He wasn't a mastermind anymore. He was just a bleeding old man who had gambled a dynasty and lost. Gabriel didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He reached down with his uninjured right hand, picked up Leo's dropped revolver, and placed it on the white tablecloth, right next to the plastic bag of poisoned thread. "You always taught me to look at the hands, Leo," Gabriel said, his voice deadly calm against the ringing silence of the room. "But you forgot to look at the corners." He glanced toward the velvet drapes where Sadie stood. She hadn't moved. She hadn't screamed when the gun went off. Her eyes were locked on the bloody tableau in front of her, absorbing the brutal reality of the world she had just stitched herself into. Gabriel turned his attention back to the captains. "Put your weapons away." The men slowly holstered their guns, though they kept their eyes fixed on the traitor bleeding out at the table. "Leo Rossi is no longer a captain of this family," Gabriel announced, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. "His territories, his unions, and his offshore accounts are now under my direct control. Anyone who questions this transition will join him in the basement tonight." None of the men spoke. They just nodded. Gabriel had proven he was untouchable. He had survived a bullet and a slow assassination, and he had rooted out the rot from within his own house without showing an ounce of mercy. "Carmine," Gabriel said, waving a hand dismissively. "Take Leo downstairs. Call the cleaner. I don't want a trace of him left in this city by sunrise." Carmine grabbed the older man by the collar of his ruined coat and dragged him from the room. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, leaving behind the suffocating smell of cordite, copper, and roasted lamb. Gabriel dismissed the rest of the captains with a single look. They filed out quietly, eager to distance themselves from the blood on the floor. When the room was finally empty, Gabriel let out a long, ragged exhale. The adrenaline was fading, and the heavy, dull ache in his left shoulder was returning with a vengeance. He stood up slowly, stepping over the shattered glass, and walked toward the corner where Sadie was waiting. She looked up at him. She didn't back away. "You saw the pocket," Gabriel said softly. His coat shifted. Sadie replied, her voice remarkably steady. When he reached, the fabric pulled tight across his chest. People don't reach inside their coats when they're angry unless they have something heavy to pull out. Gabriel stared at her. She wasn't a killer. She wasn't a mobster. But she understood the mechanics of the world better than men who had lived in it for decades. She saw the seams. She saw where things were broken, and she knew exactly how they would tear. "You saved my life again," Gabriel said. "I just stated a fact," Sadie murmured, looking down at the blood stain seeping into the Persian carpet. Carmine did the rest. Gabriel reached out with his right hand. He didn't touch her, but he rested his hand on the wall right beside her shoulder, boxing her in slightly, forcing her to look up and meet his eyes. The physical proximity made her heart hammer against her ribs. She could see the dark circles of exhaustion under his eyes, the brutal toll the poison had taken on him, yet the raw, magnetic power radiating from him was undeniable. "I offered to clear your ledger," Gabriel said, his voice dropping into a low, intimate register. "I paid your mother's debt. I told you we were even, but we aren't. Not anymore." Sadie swallowed hard. "So what happens now?" "Now I give you a choice," Gabriel told her. "I have a car waiting out back. There is a duffel bag in the trunk with $200,000 in untraceable cash. You get in, you drive away, and you never have to see me, Carmine, or a drop of blood ever again. You can go back to being invisible." Sadie looked toward the empty hallway. She thought about the cramped apartment above the factory. She thought about scrubbing floors for men who wouldn't even look her in the eye, riding the subway at midnight, and counting loose change to keep the heat on. She had spent 22 years keeping her head down, swallowing her pride, hoping the predators of the world would just walk past her. She thought about being safe and poor and entirely alone. Then she looked back at Gabriel. He was damaged, dangerous, and ruthless. But he saw her. He had handed her a pair of scissors when the smartest doctors in the world told him she was crazy. "And the second option?" she asked quietly. Gabriel's dark eyes searched her face. "You stay. Not as a maid, not as a guest. You stay by my side. You see things I don't. You catch the details everyone else misses. I need that. I need you." He paused, the hard edge of his voice softening just a fraction. "But if you stay, Sadie, you can never leave. You become part of the family. Part of me." Silence stretched between them, heavy and absolute. Sadie looked at the table, at the poisoned threads resting in the plastic bag. She had spent her whole life fixing other people's broken seams. It was time she built something for herself, even if she had to build it in the dark. "I'm tired of being invisible," Sadie said. Gabriel smiled. It wasn't the cold, terrifying smile of a mafia boss. It was genuine, finally reaching his eyes. He reached up, gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His touch was warm, careful not to break the fragile trust between them. "Then let's get you a new wardrobe," Gabriel whispered. Because you are never scrubbing another floor as long as I breathe. Sadie started as a maid, scrubbing floors for minimum wage, entirely invisible to the dangerous men who ran the city. But by cutting a single poisoned thread, she unraveled a massive betrayal and claimed a permanent place beside the king of the underworld. Gabriel Falcone learned the hard way that the most valuable person in the room isn't always the one with the gun. Sometimes it's the one who knows exactly where the seams are weak. If you loved this deeply grounded mafia romance and want more gritty, intense stories, drop a like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel.